This is the Body Talks with Vera, where we dive deep into movement, strength, and joy at every size. I'm Vera, your host, and each episode, we're having real conversations with people who are redefining fitness, confidence, and what it means to truly live in our bodies. Whether we're talking powerlifting, nutrition, running ultra marathons, or radical self love, this is a space where every body has a story. So we're going to get into it today. We have Milda. And Milda is an MSc nutritional therapist and disordered eating specialist. And over the last 8 years, she has supported hundreds of people in finding food and body peace. She's a firm believer that there is a no one size fits all approach. Hence, she uses a mix of nutritional, psychological, and behavioral interventions to help people reach peace and food freedom. Welcome, Milda.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here today.
I'm so excited you're here. I think we should just dive right into it. I would love for you to tell us just a little bit about your journey into nutritional therapy and disordered eating support.
Yes, absolutely. I think just like a lot of my colleagues, a lot of professionals who work with binge eating and eating disorders, disordered eating, I do have history with it myself. And I think very often it's what inspires people to show others the way and show others the tools that were useful. So a little bit about my story without getting too much into it. I guess it all started for me when I say that. I think it started when I was a teenager, but I do believe that it started much, much earlier because there were risk factors in my environment. So for example, I grew up in the family that my mother was dieting a lot of the time. And, I was born in Lithuania, which when I was born, we had Soviet Union still there, which left when I was 3 years old. So actually the environmental influence of that was that, there's let's say a new country that's trying to survive and make it. And so there was a lot of this attitude of we really need to try harder, go, 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 perfectionism, right? So a lot of those things did influence my relationship with food. And I think as the Soviet Union was leaving, then we had more influences from, more TV shows, magazines, influences that we didn't have before. And suddenly we start to look at our bodies differently and our relationship with food and different foods coming in, right? That weren't available for us before. So my dieting career, the way I call it, started when I was about 11, 12. I remember looking at books of calories and counting calories. And I remember looking at, a 12-year-old looking at calories of a lasagna and thinking, I will never be able to have this again because it's so high in calories, which is absolutely ridiculous to have a thought like this, right? But I then continued to control my food and really think about my appearance for over a decade and way over a decade. But actually in that time, when I was around 16 to 18, I started doing academic rowing a little bit more, let's say professionally. And that was an interesting part because suddenly I was in the lightweight category and I wanted to stay in that category because there was less competition there. And so interestingly, I started to, before competitions, we would carb load to have the energy, then start to cut carbs after competitions, all these very disordered behaviors around food. And during my time with academic rowing, somebody suggested, oh, well, you can just eat lots and then purge, right? And so that drove me into quite a few years with bulimia and binge eating. And after that, I moved to the UK. And so my relationship with food continued to be quite disordered. But I found myself, so I studied hospitality management at the time, and I went on to be a sommelier, which is a wine expert. And so interestingly, I landed this amazing job in a 2 Michelin-starred restaurant in London, which sounds super glamorous, except that, I'd have to work 60, 70 hours a week. We'd be in a basement, with really hot uniforms. And I was in the stage of my life where I had this huge breakup. I didn't really process it because I didn't have the tools. I found myself alone in London with no community, so really isolated. And this is when binge eating started to become a real issue. I would binge most days, some days a few times per day. I would sometimes purge. I would sometimes try and compensate with exercise. Right? So it's that very disordered picture with food and the body. And so from then on, when I realized there is an issue, actually, I wasn't in a place where I could get really good support. Let's say working with a experienced eating disorder therapist, because finance was an issue as well, right? So I did quite a lot of self-help, and my recovery took quite a long time because of that, because I just didn't have good guidance that was available for me at the time. And so I did recover, but I used a lot of tools. One of them was yoga meditation, lots of different tools. But nutrition played a huge part for me personally, because by only changing a few things in my diet and lifestyle, and I'm not talking about being more strict, I'm talking about being more nourishing, starting to listen to my body more, I started to feel more energy, and I started to feel more positive. And, that was quite transformational, just changing a couple of things. And I thought, wow, there really is something in this nutrition thing, right? And so I went on to requalify to be a nutritional therapist. And while also going through the recovery in the background. And so that really helped me to finalize my recovery and the tools I found. And once I started practicing over 8 years ago, when you finish nutritional therapy course, there was a 3-year course, they say, just wait and see what kind of clients start to find you. Because I was working with gut health and anxiety, vegan diets, vegetarian diets, and so on. And people who would be coming would be people with disordered eating and binge eating. And I thought, okay, well, that's quite clear who I want to focus on and who I want to help, because it just was part of my history. That's, I guess, in short.
I love that. Like, that's such an interesting journey that you've kind of gone through there. And, I will just touch on the fact that, the people who started coming to you were the people with disordered eating and binge eating habits. And I always find it interesting that that's happened to me, and it's happened to so many other entrepreneurs I know, even in different industries, different fields. It's the people that are most similar to you are attracted to you. And I always think that's interesting. But the fact that you were, a sommelier, oh my gosh, I can't pronounce the wine
That's okay.
person, the 2-star
Yes.
Michelin. Like, I can only imagine, like, having, I think, of bad, like, mental states I've been in through breakups or whatever, where I, again, didn't have the tools. But then on top of that, being in, like, a very, I would assume, very strict kind of workplace, right? Like, it's very, like, you have to be a certain way, especially for something of, like, that caliber. And to go through it, to, finally get to a place where now you are that person helping, even your past self in a way, right? I think that's really lovely. And, I'd love to kind of talk about that kind of difficulty so many of us find of feeling at home in our bodies, especially when it comes to a nutritional standpoint. Like, why do you think it is so difficult for us?
Such a great question. I was reflecting on it before, why is it so difficult for us? And there are, I think, a lot of reasons for it. And just like I mentioned, me growing up and having the environment, and the environment changing, and environment has a huge effect on us. And, it really depends. And especially for people who are more sensitive, some people are able to go, okay, especially if they're resilient and they have the tools and they grow up in environments that are open to talking about emotions and emotional resilience and emotional intelligence, right? Which wasn't really the environment I was growing up in. So
Yeah.
the messages that you get with that around your body is like, okay, so-and-so has done this, or their body's like this. And you start to internalize saying, okay, if she is skinny and I'm not, means there's something wrong with me, right?
Mm.
And that
Yeah.
happens quite a lot to more sensitive people. And this is a huge distinction, I think. And this is where also perfectionism comes from, right? So it's like, okay, I need to try harder. I need to do better. And I find that through this journey, whichever influences we have, whether, of course, trauma is a huge one that people may not want to feel their feelings. They might not want to be in their body because it doesn't feel safe, right? That's another huge aspect of it. So working with people, I noticed that there often is this mistrust of being in the body and not being able to listen, not having the tools to listen to what it's trying to tell us, but
Yeah.
also not trusting what it's telling us, right? For various reasons. And so, again, the diet culture and the society in general there's always this, almost this idea that how we are and what we are, it needs fixing all the time. We
Yeah.
need to do better. We need to change it. We can't trust it. We can't just be, right? And I think that doing it differently in the world currently that we live in, it's a bit of a rebellious act, right? How dare you be a different way? How dare you not diet or not work on yourself all the time, right? So I
Yeah.
think this is why we just don't trust our bodies and we don't feel at home because it doesn't feel
Mm.
like we should be happy with what is, I guess.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, definitely. I immediately think of capitalism coming into play here
Mm,
because, you know, we're always told like we have to be productive, we have to do this, we have to do that. We shouldn't rest, we shouldn't listen to our body's cues. We, you know, even in the fitness industry, like, you know, no pain, no gain, like you have to get your summer body, you have to do this, you have to do that, like you have to go until you're basically breaking your bones almost. And I think, yeah, like we're really conditioned to have these kind of internalized thoughts. And I think, you know, in North America, of course, like Y2K, and I'm sure, you know, in Lithuania, you may have seen it, but definitely in the UK, like that kind of rise of this very skinny and small, thin, like actor, actress, and then like bold words saying they're fat kind of over top on these magazines. And of course, like for me, that's when I really started noticing it. And of course, I was like, you know, maybe 7, 8 years old when I started seeing those. And so, of course, that immediately started internalizing into me. And for myself, being in a plus size body, being around other people who were smaller than me, I kept thinking, well, there's something wrong with me then. There's something wrong. I
mm,
need to be like them. I need to fall in line. I need to, you know, be again, be small, be productive, like never take a break, like keep going. And I think that's so interesting because yeah, it's such a feeling that so many of us experience. And I think
mm.
it's so hard because, you know, society has really set us up to not feel comfortable in our own bodies, in our own skin. So that's definitely
Absolutely.
tough, yeah.
Absolutely. And something I'll add to this is that I see, a lot of people I work with, we over time we learn to how to trust your body a little bit more and more and more. It is a journey though, because at first it's like, okay, people may have those rules, let's say food rules that keep me safe. So I need to do X, Y, Z. I can't eat this, I can't eat that. But actually all of that is external guidance. So
Yeah.
something I've heard, something someone said, a belief that I created about this food or this situation. And over time, what amazing things happen just by working with nutrition, but also beliefs. And the amazing thing that happens, people start trusting themselves, not just more in their bodies, but around other people, around boundaries. They start to sift information differently. And it really, becomes something else. It's like finally we're coming into our power of how I want to be in the world. And, seeing those messages is damaging. The same message of rest is bad and it's lazy and you shouldn't rest, and
Yeah.
that was one of the things for me that was so powerful about recovery is that, but I only noticed years later that I was recovered. I didn't have behaviors, my thoughts, I didn't have thoughts around binging or anything like this. I was still working on body image and certain thoughts around the body. But rest was very difficult, right?
Mm.
And not being productive was very difficult. And I still have to go, wait a minute, this is really important. and this is just part of the picture. Like
Mhm.
that go, go, go of, it's not good enough. I'm not doing enough. I have to come back and say, but that's part of the problem. I have to rest. Right. And every
Mhm.
time I rest, everything is much better. My relationships, my mental health, right?
Yeah.
But these are such simple things. So I guess just
Mhm.
quickly, what I was saying is that, yeah, so people learn how to listen to that internal guidance,
Yeah.
which we all have, but we lose sight of it. We lose that connection. And sometimes, especially with intuitive eating, when I work
Yeah.
with people, you never go from I'm binging and suddenly I'm an intuitive eater. There are so many steps to get there because you
Yeah.
can't trust your body if it's very dysregulated, right? It's not
Mhm.
going to send you the right signals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, definitely. And I just really want to stress, like, it is a journey, right? Like, it's there's so many things in life that is a journey, and we can't expect it to just go from A to B that fast. There's all these tiny steps we have to make and, constantly make. Like, I don't think there's ever an end point we get to. I think it's a constant journey, and we're just evolving and growing as we go along. But kind of on that line of, listening to our body, are there any signals that we often ignore or misinterpret that you think people should be paying more attention to?
Gosh, yes. I think especially with binge eating or disordered eating, there are some signals there are a lot of signals that we may not notice.
Mm.
Very often with binge eating, actually it becomes uncomfortable to be in the body because let's say, let's say with restriction and then binging, whether it's restriction that is physical or mental, there are these extremes, right? We're going to extremes. It's like the swing of the pendulum. I'm really
Mm.
hungry or I'm really full. And it becomes not very comfortable being in the body and listening to it because those two extremes and neither feel good.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
over time, people become quite disconnected from the body. And yeah,
It just
yeah,
makes me think, of in the fitness industry where people who are just starting off or people who kind of fell into that very toxic fitness mindset where it's, well, if I'm not in pain, I'm not doing enough. And then, okay, if I'm in pain, well, now I'm in pain.
yeah.
It is like that going back and forth and to kind of find that mid ground of, like just taking a breath to be like, no, I'm here. And like even just recognizing it, recognizing where you
Mm,
are can be such a powerful step because so many people don't, because we're so dysregulated from our bodies. We're not in check with ourselves. So to even
mm.
recognize like this is where I am right now, like this is where I want to be, or this is where like I want to go or whatever, but this is where I am right now, and I think can be very important.
Something that comes to mind as you're talking about this, I also see this, and that's from my own experience. One of the most transformational experiences for me with recovery was going to a yoga class,
Mm.
and suddenly, I came from competitive sports background and Michelin star restaurants, like it's all competition and hierarchy,
Yeah.
right? And I go into a yoga class and I'm like, right, what is everyone else doing? How much do I have to do? Like, not really listening to anything. And suddenly the teacher starts to go on about, really listening to what your body needs. And I was like, I don't know what that is, and
Mhm.
what was interesting is that with all competitive sports, I would be doing it for a couple of years, a few years, and then stop because I think internally I just couldn't continue competing and the
Yeah.
pressure on myself that I put, and I
Mhm.
need to be better, and it's so
Yeah.
exhausting. With yoga, I continue to do it because there actually is no pressure. It's like, it's just
Yeah.
for you, just for your body. And it's
Yeah.
something I continued, for years. And sometimes I do it a few times per week. Other times I don't do it for weeks. But I
Mhm.
know I will come back because there's no pressure, right?
Yes. And like I think that's such an important thing, like for myself at least as a movement coach, like I don't want people to feel pressure. I don't feel like I'm not a sports coach where I'm teaching you how to be competitive and how to like do your absolute best and like at this peak performance level. Like I'm looking and asking people to find movement that feels good for them in a way where they're not pushed, like they're pushing themselves a little bit because we do love a good challenge, but not to a point of, pain or burnout or just stress. Like we're looking to kind of find, that place where we feel comfortable in our bodies of, pushing a little bit just to get a little bit further to reach our goals, but not so much that we're going to, burn ourselves out or, make ourselves create these negative thoughts. It's great.
Absolutely. And, when you talk about the journey and there are steps and, very often when people come from competitive backgrounds and people I work with a lot, people come to me because they don't want to be intuitive eaters or mindful eaters or, listen to their bodies. They come to me because they want to stop binging and they want to feel in control around food and they want to feel like, they know what's going on rather than being on this autopilot. And so, you know, these things, I guess, that we do, in different lines of work, but in a way very similar because it's coming back into the body and listening to yourself. These are not things that are so sexy, to
Mhm.
say to
Yeah.
people, hey, we're going to do this. But actually, when people go through it, because the society says like, no pain, no gain, and be productive and performance speak, exactly all those, catchphrases. But actually, when you start to go through this journey and it's a constant reminder for people that it's like, okay, it's a small step, but you're always moving forward. And, maybe a few months back, a few months after, a year after, they look back and they're like, oh my gosh, I
Yeah.
realize now that I'm so much more in tune with myself. And these are the best moments because then it's like aha moment of like, that's what freedom really feels like. And this is what control really feels like. It's that relaxed way of listening and knowing that if you just listen properly, your body
Yeah.
will tell you.
Yes. I have to wonder, like, I don't know the answer to this. Maybe there's been studies, I'm sure there's been studies, but it just makes me think of, the parasympathetic nervous system and like how, there's so often times where we're put on that fight or flight mode. And, I think of recently I did a workshop on posture. And I think, when we're told to kind of sit in a way that isn't our normal posture, it does set off our fight or flight. And I do kind of think that a lot of these types of mindsets and, around fitness and how we treat nutrition can kind of set that off. And it's really, I think what we do is a way to kind of calm that down so we can kind of be like, oh no, like let's take that pause and like see it from almost an outsider perspective, but really we're going inside to kind of see like,
Mm,
no, this is exactly what we should be doing. And it feels safe for us. It feels calm and good for us to do.
mm. Yes.
Yeah.
And I guess I'll just come back to one of the points. You said, what are some of the main signals we misread? And I started going into it, but I just wanted to mention, so that there are these signals that the body sends us, whether it's emotions that we might be disconnected to. There could be, one of the top ones I see, hunger and fullness, right? That people get really disconnected from, or they often come to me and they say, I don't even know when I'm hungry or I'm full anymore because it's so dysregulated.
Yeah.
And cravings, right? And cravings. And I'll touch on both of these really quickly, but cravings is a really interesting one because often people just try to squash it down and I shouldn't be feeling this and this is a bad thing. And, this is a temptation and lack of willpower and so on. But I see cravings, it's almost like, hey, that's interesting. Let's look at this. This is a sign from our body that something is missing, right? And very often when we start to go into it, there can be various things that might be missing. Often I start with nutrition because if we're dysregulated, then, blood sugar dysregulation, for example, can feel like certain emotions. Like, let's say we go through spikes and crashes of blood sugar. It could give us anxiety at times. It could feel really low at times. But actually, when we balance that, we feel so much more stable to then work with everything else that's there, whether it's
Mm,
emotions or, so those cravings could be, okay, lack of proper nutrition or regularity or, protein or something else is missing. Then we can go, okay, so what else is left with those cravings? Then we get into all the emotional stuff, which could be, I'm really stressed or I'm missing time for myself. I don't have time for myself, right? So
mm,
behind are all these other things, but
Yeah.
some we can't just start listening to them because the body's not going to give us that straight away. We need to start to
Yeah.
get acquainted with that very slowly. And this
Yeah.
is where work with hunger and fullness actually can help us get into it.
Yeah, it's really about taking those small steps. I love how you explain that. I think that's great. I'd love to actually talk a little bit about the binge cycle and
Mm.
what are like even what it is, but also what are some common triggers that you see that lead people towards it?
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. So the binge cycle, and I guess there's a couple of things, right? So we have binging itself, right? So
Mhm.
what is binging itself? And sometimes people confuse it a little bit because they say, oh, I sometimes overeat or have too much or have a whole chocolate bar to myself and I binge. So we need to discern, what really is overeating, having too much, and binging. And I think where binging really stands out for me is that normally it's eating large quantities of food. I know that's different for everybody, but it's, very often we're consuming, thousands of calories in one go. Right? I don't really focus on calories in my practice, but it's just to give an idea, right? So it could be a huge, much more than the whole entire day of meals, right?
Mm.
It could also be, it very often what discerns it is that there is this sense of losing control. It's not, oh, I'm making a conscious choice to have an extra slice of pizza or two, but I'm enjoying this, and so I'm actually making this choice, right? It's
Yeah.
more binging feels like autopilot very often. It
Hmm.
feels like I can't stop. It very often comes together with feelings of shame, regret, guilt, and it's most of the time 99% of the time is secretive, right? I need to do it on my own. I need to hide the wrappers. No one must know about this. It's one of the things with disordered eating and eating disorders specifically is that eating disorders thrive in secrecy, right? It's a
Mm.
key thing, I think, which is quite interesting. So,
Yeah.
yeah, so that's really what a binge is. And so a binge cycle, it's when these binges continue. But what's really interesting about this binge cycle is because very often it starts with restriction, right? So whether it's restriction that is mental or physical, it could just be thoughts. I should be good today and not eat for half of the day, or I'm fasting today, and not eating. And then after a while with not having enough, whether it's again physical or mental, or saying no to all the things you want to, normally the mind and the body can't take it anymore. So it leads to a binge, right?
Yeah.
And then the binge happens, and then we have that shame and guilt and regret, which then leads us to assert, saying, I will do better. I need to try harder. I need to have more willpower. And actually,
Yeah.
what that then leads to is more restriction. And, a very common thing I see is that, okay, people might not have breakfast and be quote unquote good for lunch, and have a small salad with no protein and fats and whatever else, which doesn't
Yeah.
really fill them up. And then it gets to dinner time, and actually their blood sugar is so imbalanced that they can't stop eating, right? It's this
Yeah.
autopilot. They have a
Mm.
huge binge, and what happens after? They say, right, that's it tomorrow. I'll start again. So I'm going to not have breakfast, right?
Yeah.
And it perpetuates the same cycle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It I think you just summed up my entire teenage life, really, because I did for a long time suffered from binge eating, and that literally was it. It was not out skipping breakfast. I remember one time I did an exam, and the way my stomach grumbled because it was early in the morning, and everyone looked at me because I was just so hungry. But I was
Mm-hmm.
like, no, I'm waiting until like after the exam, when I have lunch, I'll have like two pieces of lettuce and call it a day.
Yeah.
Like, and then of course it
Yeah.
would continue, and then I would binge at night and, try again the next morning, and it would just keep going. And it is a circle, and it's so hard to
There's-
get out of. And I'd love to actually kind of talk about that shame you mentioned, because I
Mm.
definitely think it's there. It 100% is there. And kind of what are some ways, well, I guess we can kind of go back to what role does shame play in perpetuating the binge cycle, but also how can we begin to disrupt that?
Mm. Yeah, I think it's a great question because, yeah, shame, like I mentioned, the binge restrict cycle, it has its own big part
Yeah.
that fuels the next part of
Yeah.
restriction. And I think it's really key to start to acknowledge that it's there. And
Mhm.
I think that because binge eating comes with so much secrecy and shame and not being able to and not feeling like you can share because it feels like, oh my God, no, we have all this stigma about, oh, you've eaten too much. That means something about you. You know, you're lazy or you're not trying hard enough. And, and so that shame is a massive piece. Shame is a big one. And it's really important to start to acknowledge that. And, just like you shared your story, especially in teenage years, I remember I had very similar cycles as well. And, instead of going and speaking to somebody about it, I felt like it was something wrong with me. I couldn't do it. Why can everyone else do it? And I think a lot of dieting messages around, and especially, before and after pictures, there's proof that it works. By the way, it doesn't, right? And
Yeah.
we'll get into this. But I think the binge restrict cycle is often fueled by shame, which can often be fueled by messages around dieting specifically. And what happens when you're on a diet, for example, diets don't work, right? Especially we're talking about these fad diets, lose weight quickly. And people may say, there are research articles that say that, cabbage soup diet works. Yes, there are. But what they say is that cabbage soup diet or something similar or a meal replacement works for, say, 6 to 12 weeks and people lose weight. But what they don't do is they don't follow them for a year after or two
Yeah.
years after to see was it successful or not.
Mhm.
And I think this is the main message. So from dieting messages, we hear this that other people are successful, so you should be successful. So when diets fail, which is exactly what they're meant to do because it's a multi-billion-dollar business, right? That's how they keep people stuck in it. Then we say, it's not the diet's fault. It wasn't the crab diet. It's actually me. There's something wrong with me. So it
Yeah.
perpetuates that guilt and shame. And so when we don't understand really how the binge restrict cycle works, that shame is a huge driver that's saying you're not, you're not actually trying hard enough, but we're just going straight into restriction again. And I'll do better tomorrow. And very often for me, it was the same scenario. I had to go through 10 plus years of that to understand, wait a minute, maybe it doesn't work,
Yeah.
right? And hopefully for other people, it can be shorter than this. But talking about this shame, right? So I know some of these steps are quite hard to get started with, but it's important to bring that self-compassion
Yeah.
instead of going, the army general that's inside our head saying, do harder, do more, and be more
Yeah.
productive. Just starting to get curious. What is actually happening? What is this binging giving me? Is it giving
Mm.
me anything? Is there a role that it's playing? Right? Very often, when you start to get curious about it, just like you said, taking a few steps back, trying to be an outsider, and try and understand what's happening, right? And it could be that you start noticing, actually, you know what, this is the only time I feel I'm not feeling very much, right? And it's good because normally I feel lots of things, or I can see it's a coping mechanism because these horrible things are happening in my life, or I have so much stress, I don't know what to do with it, right? And I
Yeah.
think that awareness is the really first step. And
Yeah.
together with self-compassion, I would also mention self-forgiveness, right? So straight after a binge, just going, you know what? It's happened. But what if this isn't my fault? This is something else that's going on that maybe I'm not aware yet. And my body is just doing its thing of trying to survive and trying to get the energy back.
Yes. Oh my gosh, yes. Like, I think the self-compassion, but also self-forgiveness, that's oof. Because I do think, yeah, it can be that can be so hard though, right? But just the act of being kind to yourself to recognize, like, okay, it happened, this is it. How can we move forward in a way that's productive? And it could be, maybe it is something like journaling or meditating
Mm.
to kind of like go in, but also it could be reaching out to like someone like you or someone in like a therapist kind of realm, something to kind of help kind of decipher and someone to
Mm.
help give you tools to help decipher kind of what's going on. How can we continue to be compassionate to ourselves and work forward from here? And
Mm.
I would love to kind of go off that even just to talk about the summit you are hosting fairly soon, the Break the Binge Cycle Summit. What inspired you to bring this event to life?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm needless to say, I'm super excited for the summit. We have loads of amazing speakers, which we'll get into in just a moment. But in terms of the summit, what inspired me, I think there's a couple of things. I've been doing this work for over 8 years, and I have my tools and strategies, and I continuously learn about different ways. And this year, I've taken a bit of a break for a couple of years. I continue to see clients, but I've taken a break from doing, reaching more people and I guess being visible, right? And I came back and I thought, okay, well, I want to start talking about this more and reach some new people. And what I thought is so much has changed in the online space, and whereas humans are also changing. And I thought, I just feel like after doing this work for a little while, I'm ready for something different. And I thought, what would be amazing is that often when I do this work, I have a couple of people that I refer people onto. And very often when I work with someone with binge eating, they would be working with another therapist. I might be looking more from the nutritional standpoint and food rules and intuitive eating, mindful eating, and someone else might be looking at, trauma and mental health and, lots of other aspects that would help someone,
Yeah.
shame and so on. And I thought, what would be amazing would be to bring lots of experts together and share knowledge and do this event, where people see how many different ways of approaching binge eating recovery there is, because
Yeah.
there's so many. And what I find with my clients a lot is that when they come to me, they say, I've tried everything, right? But when we start talking about it, it's mostly dieting that they've done. And sometimes I find we reach a point with my clients that I find that, okay, you need a different type of expertise.
Mm,
Or sometimes people, when they start to recover, like I did, they don't have very much finance and
yeah.
they don't know what's out there and they don't know how helpful it might be for them. And
Yeah.
so this event, because it's free and there's lots of different people from different walks of life, and they might go, oh my goodness, help is available,
Yeah.
it's possible, and there are resources, here are the professionals, and it might just start to help them understand that there's so much more to it and that, there is hope, essentially.
Yeah. I do think even on that, like it gives people like those, initial tools that they may need to start making those steps forward into, a more kinder relationship with their body in that nutritional
Mm.
sense. I'm so excited. Like I'm gonna be a part of the summit too. I think it'll be so much fun. But I'd love to know like what can attendees expect from the summit? And are there any sessions or speakers you're especially excited about?
Sure. So, my intention with the summit was exactly like you said, there are lots of different experts. And it wasn't just, hey, let's do let's do a short introduction into all these different ways of approaching binge eating recovery. My intention was so that people walk away with some solid tools to help
Yeah.
them. And so that it's not, oh, I've watched this presentation and I don't know what I got out of it. Each
Yeah.
presentation is designed that people go, okay, I have one or two tools, some really big ones, or maybe a few small ones that I can actually start to action today. And that, starts me on the journey.
Mhm.
And although some people who have just started thinking about, binge eating as an issue. I need to look for help. I need to start addressing it. Some people who are in that place might find the summit and it's going to be transformational, but it's also designed to people who have been trying to get over binge eating for years or maybe decades, right? So
Mhm.
there will be new resources for them to check out. I've been in this space for over 8 years, and I found lots of new actions and tools and strategies that I thought, wow, that's amazing. I can use that with my clients, and that's really helpful. So it's going to be really an action-packed summit, which is going to go on for 4 days. So it's 28th of April to 1st of May. And each day is going to be targeted at a different area. So first of all, we look at triggers that might be driving you to binge. Second day, we'll look at how we can rewrite the script around mindset and body. Third day is going to be packed with different tools for different areas of recovery. And fourth day is actually about keeping it up, right? How do I keep the motivation going? How do I look at other ways of recovery that are going to influence me, right?
Mm.
So speakers I'm excited about, so many
Yeah.
talks I'm excited about and presentations. And you can imagine I've seen all of them already. And I'm really excited to share that with people. And like I said, they're going to be recorded. So when people sign up for the summit, every day we're going to have a new day released of the summit with 7 to 8 presentations, and people will have 48 hours to watch them through, right? So in terms of the speakers, I guess I'll just mention a few, but a few interesting talks will be, there are a couple of people, Stephanie Mara Fox and Keisha Thomas, talking about somatic ways of connecting to the body and somatic tools in binge eating recovery, which I think are really interesting and really, I guess it's a slightly newer way of looking at the binge eating recovery. So I would definitely say checking that out. On day one, there's going to be Stephanie, who's going to be talking about ADHD influence on binge eating, which is definitely a hot topic at the moment and
Yes.
really important to understand. There's also going to be a talk about binge eating and boundaries, which I really suggest to listen to as well. There's going to be one about perfection. And yeah, so lots of, on the day when we share tools, I definitely suggest for people to go through a few of those, because we have EFT, we have mindful eating that I talked about, connecting to your hunger and fullness, which mindful eating can be really helpful to get started with. And Dr. Romy Ran has got this talk about treasure chest of coping skills. So she's sharing a lot of different coping skills, emotional coping skills for regulation. So I definitely suggest that. And of course, as you can see, very excited about a lot of talks. Day 4 is also packed with amazing topics. Psychotherapist Sarah is going to cover GLP medication. So that's going to be interesting to see, how does that, it's a new topic and a lot of people are thinking about it. So it's just a really good insights from her therapy room, which I find is really
Yeah.
useful. There's also, well, I can continue for so much more, but I also know that you're doing an amazing talk on day 4, which I'm super excited about, because I think that, so many of us have got this difficult relationship with exercise. And I think you're talking about how to make movement more joyful and bringing the joy into that. And I love that talk and I love that topic because, that's something I struggled with for a long time. And I know a lot of my clients do as well.
Yeah. I think it's going to be such an amazing summit. Like even just the ones you've been saying and, reading some other people and having some other conversations. Like I know it's going to be so much fun. I'm so excited to hear the one with ADHD because I have been recently, not super recently, but kind of recently diagnosed with it. So I'm always like, let me know more about it. So I love just learning. So I'm so excited for this summit. And I think anyone who's interested should 100% sign up, especially because it is free. And of course, we'll have
Mm.
the link down below in the show notes. But I'd love to know, when we talk about food freedom, what does that mean to you in practice, not just as a concept?
Yes. You mean to me personally or to people that I might work with?
Oh, give me both answers.
Okay. Yes, I think, well, actually, maybe both of them are going to be the same, thinking about it. I think food freedom, yes, I think food freedom, again, it's a journey. But I think that the top thing about it is, you know, a lot of people I work with, they come to me and say, I want to feel more in control around food. And I feel that that food freedom can give you that control, but in a relaxed way. And it sounds so contradictory, but actually, when we start to really listen to the body, we start to unravel all the food rules and dieting messages and so on. We learn to trust our body and trust our hunger and fullness signals. I always say, our body has this inbuilt regulation system, which is always going to tell us how much we want to eat, what we want to eat in every situation, that you never have to think of all these rules that you need to learn and remember. If I go out, I have to eat that much, or if I go to an Indian, I have this and that. But you can actually choose and listen to your body and not feel shame, regret, and be happy with your choices. And, that food freedom and eating normally is what people often say looks very different for everyone. But I think that the key point is having flexibility around food, right? It's not
Mhm.
having the rigidity, flexibility around food, trusting yourself. And I know
Yeah.
for people who are binge eating, that sounds like unachievable, but
Mhm.
this is because there are steps to it, right?
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, like and even just of course the word flexibility, I'm gonna talk about flexibility training. But I think even
Mhm.
with that, you're not gonna be able to get a split in a full day. Like you need months of practice for something like that. Like none of this, it doesn't necessarily come easy, but it's worth the journey to keep trying towards it, to find that freedom. So I'd love to know, what is something you'd say to someone who's afraid of tuning into their body, and because that would lead to a sense of losing control?
Mm. Yes, that's a great question. And I think what we understand about control and losing control, and very often people are afraid to start this journey to stop binge eating because they feel like, oh, I'm going to tell them eat everything and just listen to your body. But actually, like I said, there are steps. And that very often when I work with someone, we start with nutritional balancing. And what that means is that we never say like, oh, completely let go of everything, and we actually can create this container of, let's have some regularity, let's have some guidance around food. Because when they have some guidance, let's say, we have 3 meals a day, a couple of snacks, maybe we chat about what's comfortable and what the safe foods for in that moment are. And then when the person stops binging, and because of that regularity, they start to trust themselves a bit more. Then we can start to incorporate, okay, let's start listening to, let's say, hunger for a few weeks. Like, what does that mean? What signals does your body send you? And people have come up with all sorts of signals I've never heard about for myself, right? There would be tingling in arms and tightness in chest. Like, it's so, so interesting. And these
Yeah.
are things that the bodies do tell us, and so, yeah, so that sense of losing control, because there is a journey, a person gets more resilient and more capable of trusting themselves and starts to let go of control more. And
Mm,
yeah, so I think that's in a nutshell.
yeah. I love that. It makes me just really think again, like to just like, those baby steps. That's really all it is. And, I think even of the sense of, okay, if you do feel like you're losing control, know that you have either people, community, or you have tools, especially if you're going to the summit, you'll have more tools even to fall back onto. So you're not feeling you're losing that much control. But like you said, like it's about building resilience to this and in this, so you can go a little bit further each time.
Mm, yes.
Oh,
Yes,
yeah.
and it is so important to have guidance through it, I find, because people try for a week or two and something happens, if they fall off the track and they're like, I can't do it. But actually that's part of the journey. And
Yeah.
it's quite important to have some guidance to say, hey, this is normal, but you might want to adjust this, right? And that might make things easier. And you're like, oh, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
all of that is trial and error. And I think
Yeah.
you probably see this with movement as well. It's like sometimes it's just small adjustment
Yeah.
makes everything so much easier. And you're like, oh, okay.
Yes. Oh, 100%. 100%. It is trial and error for sure. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. If people want to learn more about you and even work with you, where can they find you?
Yes, absolutely. The easiest way would be to go onto my website, which is nutritionpath.co.uk. So nutritionpath.co.uk. And they can get onto my socials there. I'm active on Instagram and Facebook. And that's pretty much it. Yeah, they can email me and they can get in touch and say hi.
Amazing. Of course, I'll have that all linked into the show now. And again, I will have the summit linked down below as well. And I do have one final question. If you could leave those tuning in today with one loving affirmation about their bodies, what would it be?
Oh, I'll just quickly say I love affirmations. And what really worked for me in recovery was to, of course, finding the one that resonates with you and really feels good. But what really works for me is adding the word learning to, right? So then I didn't feel the pressure. So the affirmation I'm leaving people with today is I am learning to fully trust myself and my body.
Well, I am learning to fully trust myself and my body. I love that idea of adding the learning to, especially if we're not feeling 100% into it in the moment. That is beautiful. Well, thank you, Milda, for joining me in this lovely, lovely conversation on the body talks. And thank you to those tuning in, our listeners. Thank you so much. Remember to drink some water and do something kind for your body today. And I will catch you on the next one.